Hello, everyone. I think we are going to wait for 5 minutes.
Good morning.
More people register, so let's see if they are going to join. Hopefully they do.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. All.
Good morning.
Yeah, there they are coming. Yeah, so I propose to start at 5:12 because we are 25 people registered. So yeah, it's just about half of us here.
Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
Good morning, Gabriele.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
So I guess we can start. I asked, well, I thought we could wait for 5 more minutes because we have 25 people registered to participate today. We are just 16 here, but I guess maybe we should get going. I mean, everyone is busy. We have other things to do. So let's start with the workshop and then the others will join eventually, I hope. So I'm going to share with you, I just closed it. Well, very well done. I'm going to share with you a very brief presentation. Today's workshop, we are going to have, the idea is to have very brief presentations in which we are going to present the methodology that we propose for TALANOA-WATER. And I'm going to start just by showing you. You should be seeing my screen. Are you seeing the right one or not?
Yes.
Or you're seeing the presentation mode?
No, it's a good one.
Okay, great. Because yesterday it didn't work in a different meeting. Okay, so I'm going to be very brief in my first presentation. I just want to make clear why we are here, just a little bit of motivation. for our meeting today. So why are we going to have this workshop? As you know, this workshop is focused on work package 3, which is the modeling work package. This work package 3 presents a modeling framework, which we are supposed to use in TALANOA-WATER in all of the labs, which is very flexible, yet has some serious, a series of basic features that we are supposed to respect in order to comply with the grant agreement that we have all signed. So what are these very basic features? So first of all, we are going to present in the following presentations by Ramiro, Artur, and myself, a protocol-based modular framework, what we refer to when we talk about a protocol-based modular framework. This is some sort of research we have been working together for the past few years with Ramiro and with Artur. We have done some applications, and the idea is that when we were working on the proposal, the idea was to use this sort of modeling approach to TALANOA in the TALANOA-WATER. So basically, a protocol-based modular approach means that we are using different systems. We are considering different systems, which are listed here: climatic, hydrologic or hydrogeologic, agronomic, micro and macroeconomic. And we are coupling them through soft links. So basically, we have independent models at the level of each system, and then we put them together in a way that we are going to show you later on. So the idea is that you see how this has been applied in the past to solve issues related to water management in Spain and Italy. Try to provide you with insights on how this can be applied elsewhere. This is the first part. The second part is obviously focused on uncertainty, because as you all know, well, the more systems you integrate, the more uncertainties you have, because they cascade from one system to another. That will be presented in the end. And the reason why I'm presenting, when we are talking about this, we are bothering you about at least having a basic knowledge of the framework, the modeling framework, is that this has to be done in all the water labs as per the grant agreement. So we are expected to apply this methodological framework in every single one of the 6 water labs that we have in TALANOA-WATER. So every single water lab from Egypt to Spain has to apply, from Lebanon to Spain, has to apply this sort of framework. Okay, we have to integrate different models and assess what are the implications of the policies that the stakeholders are going to co-develop alongside researchers. And obviously, we know that not all partners have the expertise to do that, because not all of us have in their group a macroeconomist, a microeconomist, an hydrologist, or maybe an hydrologist we all do, but in some cases maybe not, or people working on climate change modeling or agronomic modeling. I mean, not all the groups have the expertise that is required to run the modeling, but this is something that we anticipated in the project, in the grant agreement. And if you go to it, you'll see that we are supposed to collaborate with each other. So this is sort of the modeling framework is the work package in which we are supposed to collaborate in a holistic way. So thus far, we have been doing things that were quite modular. Each one did their part. We gathered data from our case studies, and then we centralized it in the Agora. But now we are really supposed to collaborate with each other. This is why I thought it would be good to show you some examples of how from Universidad Salamanca and CMCC, and also more recently also with the American University of Beirut, we have been working together to implement this multi-system approach in 3 of the 6 water labs, and we expect to do that in the other 3 in the future. So this is the agenda. You'll have it because I sent it to the email. There was a modification, so please use the last email as a reference. And without further ado, I'm going to leave the floor now to Ramiro Parrado from CMCC, who's going to make an introductory presentation on how this protocol-based modular framework can be used and the basic features. So please, Ramiro, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Diony. I would like to share my screen, but I think I need the...
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah.
Okay, I have a message that says that I'm host disabled participating in screen sharing. So you could
I guess I had to share with you. Could you try now?
Okay.
Is it working?
Yes, it is working. Thank you.
Great.
So can you see the presentation in full screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Leonie. This is the first presentation that will deal about the economic modules in the modular approach that we're planning to apply in TALANOA-WATER. And before starting, I think it is useful to have an introduction of why is model linking important. Because on one side, we have microeconomic models that provide insights that are circumscribed to specific issues in a partial equilibrium setup, and that could also represent a specific regional or local reality. On the other hand, we have the macroeconomic models, such as computable general equilibrium or input-output, that are also useful for economy-wide assessments, providing insights that are based on aggregated data at the macro sector level or for the whole economy. But when we are assessing a policy, or also it could be a climate change impact, we have to take into account that the consequences of these policies or impact will spread throughout the economy through forward and backward linkages among economic sectors. So these demand tools for economic analysis that are capable of assessing both the local and the economy-wide impacts of agricultural adaptation policies and all the interconnections between them. And one thing that we could do that is additional is that we could enrich this kind of analysis with other models that will be dealt in the second part of this session, because we could consider either hydrologic, climate, or other process-based model that could include additional and useful information in the integrated policy and impact analysis. So when we talk about linking modeling, there are at least two big approaches. The first one is the holistic modeling approach. And this approach seeks to integrate microeconomic and macroeconomic features in one single model. The advantages of this approach is that there's an effective representation of interdependencies and causal relationships between the micro and the macroeconomic systems. They also allow for a more straightforward representation of the macroeconomic system, which could be fully integrated into the architecture of the macroeconomic model. This also helps in saving computational resources because they eliminate the need of the communication of information between the two models and just applying shocks separately in each system. Of course, there are always some limitations. The first one is the limited spatial detail of the results that could be produced because everything is being included in a macroeconomic model usually. And also we have to deal with some simplification of assumptions in order to include some of the features of the macroeconomic model into the macro model. So the alternative to this approach is the modular approach. That's the one that we are planning to apply in TALANOA-WATER. And this keeps the microeconomic and the macroeconomic systems in separate modules. It also allows for the output of one model to be used as an input in the other through feedback protocols that have to be implemented for these purposes. And the advantage is that this kind of analysis provides a more detailed representation in each subsystem, and also enables the explicit representation of two-way feedbacks between the micro and the macroeconomic systems. In the limitation of this modular approach, we could take into account that each model should be developed, updated, and executed separately, and that there are some relationships and interdependencies between systems that are also more challenging to represent when we're trying to implement a framework that should consider the both models at the same time. Some examples of this modular approach that are present in the literature are shown in this table. The first one is from 2009 that basically coupled a land use model that was CLUM with the GTAST general equilibrium model, GTAP, and it provided results at the national level. And the rest of the studies that I'm citing in this table is all the studies and the experience that we have here in CMCC that we have produced working with Diony and also with my colleagues, Gabriele and Artur at CMCC. We also use this as a macroeconomic model in these studies as a macroeconomic model, ICES, which is a CG developed at CMCC, and I will give you more details about this in the next slides. And in these papers that we have published so far, we have been able to couple first a revealed preference model, then a positive multi-attribute preference model, and also in a follow-up paper that I think that Arthur will present more details about it, we increase the detail of this coupling using also the SWOT model, that is an hydrological model. So before explaining the methodology for the coupling process, I wanted to also explain the main features of the CG model that we have here at CMCC. ICES, it's a multi-region and multi-sector computable general equilibrium model. This particular version has an increased spatial scale. It's a version that my colleague Gabriel Standardi has been developing in the last years in order to add the NUTS2 regions for selected European Union countries. Now, the main features of CGs is that these kind of models allow describing economic interaction of agents and markets within countries, taking into account production and consumption, and also across countries when we introduce international trade. And we do this in a very stylized way. Other feature very important is that all markets are interlinked, as changes in relative price induce the input reallocation in the entire economic system. And the main assumptions of this kind of framework is that we have to rely on a representative agent for households and for firms. Then markets are cleared by adjustment in prices, meaning that demand will be equal to supply, and the only thing that will change is our prices. And these prices will constitute the feedback mechanism in the general equilibrium. We also are assuming a perfect competition and the full employment of production factors, and there are savings-driven investments. Talking about the database that we use, it's based on the GTAP database with 57 economic sectors and more than 140 regions, which would be aggregated for specific purposes. For the type of work we're planning to do in TALANOA-WATER, since it will be focused on agriculture, we're planning to use all the available detail in the GTAP database. This means that we will have 8 crops, considering rice, wheat, other cereals, vegetables and fruits, oil seeds, sugarcane and beet, plant-based fibers, and other crops not elsewhere classified. And then we will have also some macro sectors to represent the rest of the industry or the economy. Now, going back to the modular approach for the model, we have also two alternatives. The first one is use a one directional link that is basically linking a partial equilibrium model with the CGE, and this has been used only to assess the economy-wide effects of specific policies or impacts, such in the papers that I'm citing in this slide. And basically, the analysis starts with an impact or policy that has been assessed in a partial equilibrium model. And then this partial equilibrium model will produce some outputs as an input for the CG model. And then we can produce some aggregate indicators such as GDP output, gross value added, or sectoral output at the national or regional level. So this kind of analysis is useful to show not only what is happening at the national or regional level, but also to identify some spillover effects to other regions, countries, or even sectors within the same economy. But this is only a one-directional link. The other alternative that we have in this modular approach is to consider the two-way feedbacks. This means that we will look for a coupling between the partial equilibrium model with the CG model. And in order to do this, we have to modify both models to exchange information between them. One important part of this process is the convergence of results. And we define convergence when the information exchange between models does not result in meaningful changes between two successive simulation iterations. This means that there will be no changes in the price, in the values of the variables that we're exchanging between models. So we could say that there's an equilibrium or a convergence between the two models. So just to finalize this brief presentation, I wanted to show you a couple of examples of what we did in the past with Dion and all my colleagues here at CMCC. The first one is a paper that we published in the Journal of Hydrology. It's about macro feedback links of agricultural water management. It is basically a coupling between a decentralized representation of irrigators using a positive multi-attribute utility programming model and a regionally calibrated CG model to assess interlinkages between the micro and the macroeconomy. We analyze, in this case, irrigation water charges in the Murcia region in Spain. And the results show that the coupled macro model yields lower abatement cost as compared to the standalone micro model. So how does this methodology works? We start with the two models. Here, the micro model, or the positive multi-attribute model, and the regionalized CG model. And we decided to use a water charging policy in this case. That will be the first shock applied to the micro model. And then in the second step, we will compute what are the changes in value added in the micro model that will be fed as the productivity changes in the regional CD models. After having this input for the CG model, we can run the simulation and produce the changes in crop prices that will be subsequently fed to the micro model. And this will start an iterative two-way feedback process. And this process will be handled by a software interface until the feedback process reaches a convergence. So basically, this was the methodology we applied in this particular paper. Then just to show you a second example is another paper that we published. And if you look at the left part of the graph, we have almost the same diagram that I showed you before. The only change here is that instead of using the changes in global value added as changes in productivity, we decided to modify a little bit this kind of coupling using the land use changes that comes from the micro model in order to modify the behavior of the SCG model. And then we have also the feedback through crops prices. In this case, we also analyzed some water management policies, basically to a water change with different levels, and also a water cap to compare what would be the policy options that we have if you want to implement either the two of them. As the basic results of this example, we can say that conventional standalone agroeconomic model assessments without two-way feedbacks tend to overestimate losses on water conservation, confirming what we found out in the previous paper. And also that disregarding two-way feedbacks can lead to biased assessments in land use and water conservation policies, affecting regional and local water estimates. And one last thing that I would like to highlight from this coupling process is that with this coupling between a micro and macroeconomic model, we were able to share some insights about the balance of water conservation and water consumptions at the local level, as you can see at the right-hand side of the figure. But there's also some limitations in this approach, because in this case, we were considering also only economic models, even though we were giving some numbers or conclusions about what happens with water conservation. And that is why we thought that it was important to include some other kind of models who could support this kind of conclusions. And this could be a hydrologic model. And I think this could be the introduction to the next session that will be presented by Arthur, which could take into account also the coupling of a hydrologic model. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, you're welcome to ask them.
Thank you, Ramiro. Thank you so much. I think that if there is any very urgent question, you can make it now. Otherwise, we have the Q&A after Artur's presentation. But if there is, a very specific or technical question related to the presentation that Ramiro just made, please go ahead. Otherwise, I don't see anyone raising their hands. We can leave that for after Artur's presentations, if you agree, Ramiro.
Yes, of course.
So Artur, well, while you are noting your presentation, I will make just two very quick remarks to all the people here. So as I said, we have started working on this approach with the Lebanese case study, the Litani River Basin. We have started, well, obviously in Italy and Spain, we have been doing this in the past. The idea is to apply this as well to the French, Tunisian, and Egyptian case study. So I think the presentation by Artur will be very useful, because well, Ramiro has shown how the different socioeconomic systems can be integrated. But obviously, for example, Isam's group, Abdo's group, Abdo's not here, but I will email him later on. You are more focused on, let's say, natural sciences, and Artur is going to provide the link to the models that you are using, and I think that will be very interesting. So please, Artur, floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Johnny. Thanks. Let me try to share the screen here, and hopefully it's going to work. Let's see.
It works.
Can you see it full screen or?
Now we can, yeah.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay. So yeah, so hi everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm a postdoctoral research here at the CMCC, so the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, and also part of the Ca' Foscari University of Venice. And so today I'm going to be explaining a little bit on that, let's say, hydrologic and microeconomic modeling system that can be a sort of example that can be used in the TALANOA approach. So keep in mind that the example that we're going to be showing here, it's something that is specific to the models that we chose, but the main, let's say, conceptual framework that connects the modules and use the protocols to connect those, they are kind of flexible and can be adapted according to the specifications of different, let's say, hydrological models or microeconomic models that can be used for a similar study that I'm going to try to highlight here today. So please feel free to interrupt me during the presentation, but we also have the questions and the session dedicated to that after that. But just to give some sort of background on why we're doing this kind of coupling, so Ramiro already gave a very nice introduction on, let's say, the needs that we have to do that, and also Dionisio stressed that a little bit in the beginning of the session. But let's say that traditionally, like the way that natural science in particular, like try to approach problems related, let's say, to water management or related to resources or like water quality and so on. It's traditionally like approaching a sort of isolation from how the human world, let's say, behaves, and also the interaction that this kind of actions that you can see in the water resource managers they can have in other kind of systems. So this is, let's say, it was a traditional approach. So as you can see here, this is something that it's highlighting from 2011. So it's a decade ago. And it has been changing gradually over the time, you know, so like this kind of notion and understanding that the human system and the water systems, they have to be considered in a sort of integrated way. It has been increasing and has led to new developments, both in science, but also in the application to the field. So
Artur, just 1 second, because Marta just sent a message. She says that she cannot hear you well. So if you could move closer to the microphone, I don't know if that's possible.
Okay, let me try to increase the volume here.
Now it's much better.
Yeah. Let me just try to increase also the volume of my microphone. So. There you go. It should be a bit better now. Let me know.
It is, at least to me. I don't know, Marta, if it was for you.
Yeah, it's better. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm really sorry about that. Yeah, let me. Okay, but then I have to switch the screen. I'll try to speak like that. So basically, like some of the knowledge that are coming from research and from different areas that kind of highlight this kind of integration that is required between the different systems that can lead to different responses both in the human and the water system. It has been going on for a couple of decades now, so we can highlight here the first one as being an example of the introduction of the concept of socio-ecological systems. We also have the notion of the Anthropocene more at the global scale that tries to highlight the fact that humans are leading to a sort of influence that it's kind of comparable to different geological eras that we saw in the past. And also the new one, the concept that is more or less in line and also highlighting and overlapping with some of the concepts that we're exploring today is the notion of socio-hydrology, or a new science that is described as socio-hydrology. that basically says that the couple human and water system, they need to be kind of assessed in a sort of integrated way, especially when we're going to be taking decisions that go a little bit longer in time. So for instance, talking a little bit about climate change and different climate periods in the future. So basically with that in mind and with this idea in mind, we come up with a similar approach that that was described by Ramiro, but with the, of course, the introduction of hydrological model in that sense. And the connection that we decided to do, it was basically by coupling an hydrological model with a microeconomic model. So the idea to do that is to work more or less on the local scale. And when I say local scale, we're trying to stay more or less at the boundaries of a river basin, so in a kind of watershed area or dimension that we're trying to evaluate. But I'll show that this sort of connection can also then be expanded and go a little bit broader, like to the macro. So this, for instance, let's say is the general framework that we can see, the one that connects the three main models that that we're trying to highlight here. We can start here by considering, for instance, some sort of policy shock. Let's say it can be a policy that tries to, I don't know, tries to implement some situation where water can be allocated in a different way. So it can, for instance, reduce the amount of irrigation water that farmers can use. So this can lead to a shock entering the system, in this example, in the macroeconomic model. So this can lead to some sort of different thinking between the farmers, and they can decide to switch, for instance, crops, or decide to do a sort of a different way that they can apply irrigation to their crops. And this kind of changes, let's say on land use changes, so not just like changing the crop, but also the way that they manage their land can have like consequences and connect with the macroeconomic model, which can feed back in, for instance, in crop prices changes to the microeconomic model. So this is something that has already been discussed in the first presentation by Ramiro. But and this is basically the human and human system, as we're calling here, or the macro micro system. However, this changes also in the macroeconomic model, basically in the way that farmers can think and interact with their land, can also lead to changes in the hydrological system, so in the water system, through land use changes. So basically the way that they decide to manage the land, be that by changing their crop portfolio or changing the way that they're going to be allocating the resources that they have, or using the resources that they have available, for instance, water resources, can lead to a different response in the hydrological model, which in turn can lead to a different sort of water availability for this farmer himself, or even for farmers that are located downstream. This has an influence, so this has a feedback that comes and feeds again the macroeconomic model. And we have this sort of very two big groups that that interact, one in the human and human system, the one that has been described first in the first presentation, and the one that I'm going to be introducing a little bit later on the next slides on the human water system. Take a look, that is not only like a policy shock that can be incorporated in such framework. So we have, for instance, you could have some sort of macroeconomic shock coming from, let's say, an influence in the macroeconomy that could trigger also change in the whole system that we're evaluating here. But also something that we might be interested in the project, that is taking a look on the climate scenario. So, for instance, a reduced amount of water availability for irrigation, be due to some changes in groundwater, or also due to precipitation patterns, can also lead to some stress and lead to a different sort of configuration that we have here in the system. So focusing now on the left side of that framework, which is the water and human system, the connections of those. We can highlight the, let's say, the pros and cons of each one of those, and why it's nice to consider them together and consider this sort of exchange of information between the models. So as you might be familiar, the hydrological models, they are mathematical constructs that allow to simulate the water cycle in basically hydrological defined units. These depend on the kind of model that we're using. So you can work at the river basin scale, or you can work with sub-basins, or you can work at the pixel level. So this depends a little bit on the configuration that you have in the model. The capabilities are more or less kind of shared among this generic group of hydrological models. So they can estimate, for instance, surface runoff, reservoir management. Some of them can also simulate groundwater dynamics, where it's more or less relevant for the case study area and so on. Limitations, as we tried to highlight before, we have the human impacts are usually considered as external forces. So these are just some sort of external factor that can lead to a different result. And basically, there is no connection between the human changes and the changes in the water system. On the macroeconomic models, then on the other hand, we have the capability of studying the behavior and decision making of agents, which can then lead us to better understand the allocation of resources, which, for instance, can be in our case the water availability for irrigation. Basically, it allows to estimate the relationship between cross-portfolio and land management, revenues and costs. And then the limitations are kind of similar to the hydrological models, but in a sort of inverted way. So basically, there's no impacts of the human system on the environment, so it's an intrinsic consideration. And also, there's no feedback from the natural system. So the connection that we're trying to do is basically to create this sort of feedback loop between the two different modules that we're considering. Just to give a practical example of how we did that using the SWOT, the Soil and Water Assessment tool for Soil and Water Assessment tool, sorry, for application that we did in Spain. Basically, how SWOT in a standard way works, it considers first the topography of the area. It considers also, for instance, the different soil types that you have and the different land cover that might be located in that particular watershed. It does this kind of spatial overlapping and spatial analysis of the information that the user is providing, and allows to compute first the definition of the sub-basins in the case study area. And after that, you can compute something that is defined as hydrological response units. Those in SWOT are defined as non-land areas within a sub-basin that are comprised of the nutrient cover, soil, and management combinations. What we did, we just incorporated a new spatial information that it's connected with the microeconomics model that basically allows us to identify the economic agents. So we can either consider them as different individual farmers, or we can group them in group of farmers that have similar responses. So that's what we did in this particular case study. We overlap this in the same way that is done in SWOT, but now what we have, it's something that we are calling as hydrological economic response units. And the main difference here is that we're not only considering, let's say, physical considerations on how water is managed and used in a watershed, but also like economic ones. So we're also thinking and trying to incorporate more or less the way that the agents think and the rationale behind how they manage water in that system. Take a notice here that we also changing the definition from land cover to land use, because we're also using land management and how they actually manage their land. In a more sort of theoretical description of the framework, you can see here how it looks like. So let's say here, I hope you can see my mouse here, but basically like on the left side of this framework, up until to this vertical line that I'm drawing here, between right in the center of the HRU definition here. You have here the basic setting that you have in the original SWOT model. And on the right side here, we have basically the setting that we have from the microeconomics model. What we did, we created this kind of framework or sets of protocols that allow the information to be exchanged between the two. And this allows us to evaluate, for instance, different sort of policy or adaptation strategies. And basically the outputs that we have are socio-ecological outputs, which we are defined here as socio-ecological outputs. These outputs, for instance, water availability for irrigation can then feed back to the system, and this can lead to a different results that we might be interested into evaluating and also taking a look on how this changes over time. These are some results that we have from the paper, just to show how this is relevant when we're taking a look when we consider, let's say, the rationale of agents. So for instance, on the right side here, we have a situation where we would be using SWOT without any kind of economic agents that they can take decisions on the fly according to the availability of water for irrigation. So basically, they would be planting the same crops over the different scenarios that we have for the reduction of water that can be used for irrigation, while they would achieve some sort of, let's say, yield or productivity that it's kind of linear according to the availability of water that they have to use to grow their crop. On the other hand, when agents can take decisions, when they can think that maybe under this sort of constraining water availability that I have, yet I might be better off if I switch to a different kind of crop, we can see that they actually do that according to the increase in the reduction of water availability for irrigation. And we can see that in general, they have a lower reduction in the yield production. So basically, they can produce more in the situation where they actually can think and they can take decisions than under a situation where they cannot think and they cannot take decisions. So this is a short example that shows the value of such a kind of framework. We have a couple or more of papers already published into that, and bringing here just some of those that you can take a look and go and read if you're interested into that. We're also working in some other ones that are going to be out hopefully soon. And with that, I basically conclude my presentation. The conclusions that I have here is basically something that they already discussed throughout the presentation. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer to any of those.
Thank you, Artur, so much. No, it was. I think it was very clear. I mean, obviously, I've been working on this one, so but perhaps I'm not the best person, not the most indicated person to say it was very clear, because obviously I know it. But I think it conveyed the key lessons that we extracted from our work on these models. So at this point, we have some time for Q&A, and I would like to have feedback from all of you. So Paolo already raised his hand. Also, I'm very interested in listening from Isam, Fethi, Nina, Marta, perhaps, because I mean, in those labs we have not still applied this approach, and this is where we can learn the most, because what we have shown here examples about how this was applied to Spain and Italy. We know we can do that, but we would like to know whether it's doable also in Tunisia, France, Egypt. So first, Paolo, because you raised your hand, obviously, and then, well, whoever wants to step in.
Thanks. Just quickly, having a look at the Artur presentation, it seems that we are going to somehow customize SWOT as a tool for coupling hydrology and economy, more or less. I mean, choosing in a particular way that the response units to be to include both reasonings in the modeling framework. Am I right? So we are going as a modeling framework. We are going with this evolution, let's say, of SWOT. I would say, no, if I'm not wrong. And right? Did I get it right, Artur?
Yeah, if I may, not necessarily SWOT, like, because it might depend on the case study area. So for instance, in some of the case study areas, we have other sort of hydrological models that are already set up. So we can already start from something that already exists and that are already like developed for the, let's say, the specific conditions that we have in this particular watersheds or river basins. So in some case studies, for instance, as I mentioned during the presentation, the groundwater dynamics might be more relevant than the ones that we consider in our case studies. So it's better to consider a model that can actually simulate in a sort of better way this groundwater dynamics than simply SWOT. SWOT is not the best model for doing that. So it depends. Like it depends basically on the case study area and the availability of data and models that we have for that case study area.
Okay.
But yeah.
I mean,
yeah, because what we try to highlight here in the presentation is that the modules, they can be changed. Basically, like you can select one or another model to run the analysis that you want to do. But the most important thing that we have to keep in mind is how to set the protocols, basically how to set the connections between the models. So in our case, we decided to go for the land use. So the difference in land use management can actually lead to the response and connect both of the two models that we're using. But maybe in another sort of connection, it can be different kind of protocol that can connect the two. You know, it depends on the availability of the tools and the models that we have at our disposal.
So for sure, we have to be very clear about in each living lab which are the expected, let's say, necessary minimum output in order to connect hydrology and economy. No.
Yes.
That regardless of the model we decide to use, we have to get those results in order to, let's say, get this bidirectional feedback between hydrology and economy. And okay, the second quick question was that in your scheme, Arthur, everything was happening inside the basin. No consumption, change of crops, and so on. It may happen, as incidentally happens in Italy, that some core decision happens outside the basin. For example, we derive water in one point, but the feeded agricultural area is outside the basin. So in that case, just we have to rearrange a little bit the scheme, but you probably have already answered as the important thing is that we keep the output coherent with the economic model needs. I guess so. This is just, it's up to us. I mean, if we have to tweak a little bit the things in order to understand what happens. And the very last thing was that I understood that from your presentation, no impact of the human system on the environment. What does it mean exactly?
This was when I was talking about the connection between the two models, isn't it?
Just in the connection interface between the two, you mean?
Yeah, so basically, let me go back to this slide so if I can share here. Let me reopen that here. I think I can share the screen here as well. Can you see my screen?
Yes, very clear.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, basically here it was just to show the sort of limitations that we have between the two approaches. So in the hydrological side, basically like the human impacts on the hydrological system, they are considered as traditional as external forces, you know. So there is this no sort of feedback between one and the other. And the same thinking is valid for the microeconomic models. So basically like let's think of water availability again for irrigation. So this is basically used as a sort of already like implied or known information that you just pass to the model before you run it. What we're trying to do here is to have this information on the fly coming from one model to the other. And this is what I say that it's a sort of thing that that comes and intrinsic like shared or exposed to the macroeconomics model.
Clear. Thanks. I'm done. Thanks a lot.
And I think, well, just one very quick clarification, Paulo. So the outputs that we are supposed to expect from each modeling exercise in the water laboratories, they are described in the, if I'm not wrong, I think it's task 3.2. There is a very thorough description of what we have to get from each of the labs. So it's the quantitative status and the qualitative status of the water body. And then direct impacts, I think they are employment and gross value added. And then indirect impacts, which are also measured through gross value added, which will be impacts on the macroeconomy. So what Ramiro was presenting in his PowerPoint. I think that's, but I don't, I mean, better check it if you want a precise definition of what we need, because it's right there, but I don't remember exactly if we are missing. I'm probably missing something.
Yes, I will double check.
And then I think it was Marta next, and then Isam. So please, Marta.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions. So the first one is about, because you talked about the inclusion of some data about land management and not only about land cover, and what type of management do you consider? Because I think, for example, for the French case studies, this could be an important feature to consider, because we are dealing with a study area which is mainly characterized by permanent culture. So the land cover changes are few, and I think the management changes are more relevant in this case. So how do you use the variable of land management? Which variable do you consider and how do you include it?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. So this also goes in line with the model that we're using. So basically SWOT allows us to be considering, let's say, the crop growing season. So let's say the beginning of the crop season until the end. You can consider that either as a fixed date, or you consider that also according to the availability of resources that you have that are being like accumulated, let's say, during the growing season. Other variable that can be done according to land management, it's a fertilizer application. So you can also consider the amount of fertilization that that you're going to be using in over your land. But in our case, the variables that we're considering, because this also has to go in line with the simulation that we're getting from the microeconomics model. So let's say the ones that are variable and the ones that are connected in the feedback loop are basically how much water the farmers are using on their crops. And the second one is which kind of crop they are growing over the specific piece of land. So these are the two connectors that we have between the two models. But as I mentioned, it can be expanded, but this depends on the specificities of each kind of model that we're using.
And also, Marta, just to follow up on Artur's comment, with Francesco, who's also here, we just included in the coupling with the hydrological model as well, macroeconomic model in which it's possible to do intensive and extensive margin adaptation. So it's possible also to not only change crops, but apply more or less water, deficit irrigation. So, I mean, and it's very much in line with a paper, a very good paper by Nina and Merel, I think the name is, in which they do also do that. So it's possible to integrate either Nina's work or the model we have been doing to have also intensive adaptation.
Okay, thank you. And the other question was about the farmers' behavior. So how do you, I think it's very related because obviously the farmer behavior is represented by the land management, but do you also included something about, for example, the choice of the crop? Because you talk about the to consider the rational the agents as economic rational in the model. So, for example, also the choice of farmers in terms of crops or other type of choice are considered like that?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I can pass this on directly to Diony because he's the expert on the macroeconomics model. So I think he can give a better response than me for that case.
No, well, you already know a lot about this. So it's basically we are, so the modeling of the farmer is done through a full-fledged microeconomic model. So the behavior is included in the model. So since we are using a modular approach, what we have is the hydrologic model, in this case SWOT. We have the CGE model, in this case the ICES, and we also have the microeconomic model, which could be any model. I mean, it's as long as the model is giving an output in terms of land use, which is the variable that we consider in most microeconomic models, the decision variable. We could use a PNP, multi-attribute, linear programming, any of these models. In this case, we use a multi-attribute in this particular paper that Artur was presenting. But we have been also using PNP or linear programming, even ensembles, which is something that we are going to deal with later on. Ensembles of models are also possible. I mean, using multiple macroeconomic models to sample or assess uncertainties. So yeah, the behavior is explicitly modeled through in a module that focuses only on behavior. And then that feeds the hydrologic model, the macroeconomic model, etc., etc. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you.
And I think if Marta has no other question, I think we can. Oh, Nina said something that maybe is related. I will say that quantities are also a key output in addition to land use, crop allocation. Yeah, so the quantities in terms of yield or water use. I mean, both of them are modeled.
Yeah, in terms of crops.
In terms of the yield produced.
Yields of total quantity of economic production.
Yeah, exactly. So what we did is I mean, your model, for example, Nina was mentioning before with Merel and probably battery business, in which you have the production function, could be also included here. And in that model, you will have also the quantities produced. Also, Francesco did something similar, in this case with a multi-attribute, in which we also have the amount produced. So depending on the amount of water you have, you produce more or less quantity of the crop.
But how do you, when you couple your micro models with macro models, you cannot ignore the quantities, no?
In the coupling we did that Ramiro was presenting, we did not have the intensive adaptation option. Okay. So we only had the land use. But it would be possible to do a coupling in which obviously you cannot include the quantities in the macroeconomic model because they don't have this detail. But we can consider land use and gross value added, and therefore you will have the quantity as part of the gross value added. And then the macroeconomic model will give you the price feedback, and then you will have the interaction.
Yeah, because I would assume that it's a central indicator because it will be affected directly by climatic change. But here we point out to the fact that maybe we are missing some crop growth model that will be affected not only by water stress, but also by other factors.
That's exactly the same problem that we are trying to address right now in a paper with Ramiro. Because we realize that, yeah, the agronomic models are also telling us that it's not only that you're changing land use and producing the same as before, but also that due to climate change, the production is going to change as well. So the yield, and you have to account for that. And we're trying to address that in a dynamic setting, which is different from the static one we presented here. But if we want to address these problems in Talanoa, it would be, I mean, it's something we are trying to do right now. It would be great to do that, for example, in the French case, because you have mostly vines, I think, or permanent crops.
Yeah.
So it would be very interesting to have that as a test site, and also working with you. I mean, you're an absolute expert on this sort of microeconomic modeling, and would be great. So
yeah, I think having also agronomists with us like Marta, and we can build on the community in RAE where we have a lot of agronomists, where we could imagine refining these things in Talanoa.
Absolutely, because one thing, so right now what we are doing, Marta and Nina, is we are using data from ECMIP. But ECMIP data is worldwide models. Perhaps we need something more regionalized, and yeah, your information will be great. We could do something much more accurate.
Yeah, just jumping in here on that, just in the case of SWOT, SWOT is also possible, and it has been already published, like in a way that it can be connected with other sorts of models that are more focused into, for instance, policy for agriculture and these responses that you can have in the crop growth and these kind of things. So SWOT can be also a candidate for evaluating this kind of responses if we want to focus into that as well. It's possible also to change the parameterization of the crops. So if we have particular detailed information from agronomists, we can actually have some setup for a study.
I think that would be awesome. That would be great, because then we will have also we will integrate the agronomic impact not only on the economic but also in the hydrologic model, which is critical to see what happens with the return flows, recharge. No, that's something we should explore. Well, that's part of the project. So we have 3 years ahead to do that. Well, 2 years and a half for the modeling. So I think we can try to refine the approach, and probably we need to revise the protocols, because this was thought as a part of an assessment for a basin in which most of the crops were annuals. So obviously when it's permanent crops, you're not going to just uproot all the crops and place some other different crop, because then you lose the investment. So yeah, it justifies working with this sort of approach. So yeah, thank you, Marta and Nina, for your feedback. This is what I was really looking for with this workshop. So now we're moving to Isam, because you raised your hand 10 minutes ago. Sorry for that. So please, Isam, you can make your question.
Okay, thank you, Johnny, Ramiro, Arthur, for your presentation. I have 4 comment and the question. The first related to land use charge, and you know, in almost desertic region, the land use is imposed by hydrology, main for cereal crops, and for annual or, for example, trees, olive trees in particular, it does not change related to hydrology, but it's fixed and mostly controlled by the availability of groundwater. And then in your model, maybe for our case, we have to change some relationship. Hydrology is not the most driver of land use. Mainly for future, it will be very difficult for us to predict the hydrology and the land use. My question is how to proceed mainly for the future period when we model the context of our case study. The second one is about SWOT, and you underline somewhere the socioeconomic characterization or layer that have to be coupled or intersected with all what is land use and slope and soil type and so. What kind of socioeconomic information that have to be specialized in a layer to be used? The third point is groundwater. Usually we model water availability using mud flow, and we make coupling between SWOT for hydrology and to estimate the recharge, and mud flow through the WP water evaluation.
Oops, no.
Sorry. Usually we make this dynamic relationship between the surface hydrology and the groundwater using the WP software, water evaluation and planning. And by chance, this software include or allow to include all the microeconomic data or information related to agriculture, cities, industry, or whatever, even livestock. And we use this modeling framework even to produce economic indicators. My question is it possible to use for our case this same or usual used approach, SWOT, WP, mud flow, and then we can even introduce some micro or macroeconomic function using the WP software, because we can introduce even GAMS codes to optimize, for example, to maximize the benefit or to minimize the impact in groundwater in order to, for example, maximize the water productivities. Is it possible to deal with the same methodology, and we can send you some paper with the other case study and to exchange? Because honestly, there is no surface water flows. It's very rare, it's less than 100 millimeters. And SWOT will not be useful for hydrology, maybe will be useful for hydrological response unit. If it is necessary to use this to couple with the socioeconomic data, it will be easy to use. If no, we prefer to use directly WP and mud flow, and to make a dynamic link between all what is water resources and sociology, for example, population and economic indicator, for example, crop yields and unit market prices and whatever economic parameters. These are our question, but we have some experience on WP mud flow, and if you have information, it can deal with all what you present as a benefits or capabilities. And thank you again for your presentation of today. It was very useful for us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the questions. They are actually very, very relevant for the project. And so let me start to the first one. So the first one, it's, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but the first question is about on how to proceed, because there's no surface hydrology relevant in the case study area, and it's much more related to groundwater, isn't it? So in this case, the protocols for sure will need to be changed. So we need to understand which kind of, let's say, feature of the component that describes the water system can be connected with a relevant component coming from the human system. So it can be the case that the component that you want to do the connection, it can be, for instance, the aquifer system. So I'm not sure how many aquifers you have in your case study area, if it's just one or if it's a collection of those, and how they are connected one to another. I'm not sure if they are confined, if they are open aquifers, and so on. So this can be, for instance, a starting point to investigate if this can be the physical descriptor of the water system that you can actually connect with the human system. On the human system side, which goes more or less in line with your second question, that is the spatial overlay of the economic agents with the characterization of the case study area. This also goes in line with the information that you have available. So for instance, in the case that we have in Spain, we didn't have information for every single farmer. So we didn't have information from every single piece of land. What we had information was for an aggregate of farmers that kind of behave in the same way, and they grow the same kind of crops, and they take decisions in a way that can be comparable among them. So we did an aggregation of farmers, and this was the way that we identified them spatially. With this identification spatially, then we did the overlay with the hydrological model, which in our case was SWOT. And then once we identified the actual locations and the actual, like, let's say, coordinates that these actions matter, then we can proceed and make the connection between the two models. So in your case, the connection might be, for instance, if this particular group of economic agents, they are extracting water from this particular type of aquifer and the location of that aquifer. Because then the things that matter is how the actually is going to be extracted and how actually the water is going to be recharged for that aquifer. So I think that this might be the easiest way for you to proceed in that case, to make a comparison between users or economic agents that are using water from this particular type of aquifer system. Regarding the third question, yes, you don't need to proceed with SWOT plus mod flow, or you can proceed with the model that maybe is already better set up for your case study area. So the only thing is that I'm not very familiar with the other models. So if you want, we can also try to have a sort of call later on to understand a little bit better how the model works and try to understand how to make operational this connection. Because basically what we need to do is to understand which kind of information can be passed from one model to the other. And this in the computer needs to be some sort of either output file that is going to be read by the other model, or some sort of connection that needs to be done already in the model itself by some programming way. So we can discuss how, for instance, you do traditionally a setup of your model, and then we can try to understand better how this connection can be done between the microeconomics model and the water system component. I'm not sure if Denise wants to add anything on top here.
No, I mean, it was very clear. Thank you, Artur. Just one very quick comment, because Sam was mentioning that they are using WP, and in WP it's true that you have all the economic info, all the economic information. It's a little bit more aggregate, but I mean, I'm all in for using the models that you're already employing, because I mean, I assume that these are the models that you are using to engage with the stakeholders, and they know them. So I mean, a key objective of TALANOA is to produce actionable science, and if they are using already WIP and you are used to produce outcomes in WIP and to go and check to stakeholders and present them the results in WIP, yeah, of course it would be much better to use WIP. I mean, there is not much sense in going and changing all the modeling you have been doing over the past years, because we cannot improve it in just 3. So yeah, the idea is to use what you already have and to improve it. And in this regard, one improvement that is very much apparent to me, at least in terms of using WIP, is the macroeconomic model, because WIP does not have the macroeconomic model. The macroeconomic impacts are not accounted for in WIP because it's just spacing wide. So using what Ramiro presented in the first presentation, it can really improve what you already have, not only in TALANOA but also for future applications you may want to do with the national institutions for assessments of river basin management, whatever. And I think that Ramiro can also, I mean, the model by Ramiro, Gabriele, by the ICMCC is really useful to that end. So I will encourage you to use that. But I think it's good to explore this now, but probably what we have to do is, I mean, as we did with, for example, with our colleagues from Lebanon, we met with Hadi and I think it was Reem, and we started to discuss what data we needed for the setup. I think it would be productive to have separate meetings with Tunisian lab, French lab, and see how we can start setting up the things. Because it's fine to discuss ideas, but then we need to know more in depth what's available. But yeah, this was very, very useful. And I didn't know you were using WIP. I know you were using Modflow, but if you have WIP, that's fine. I mean, that's great, I would say. So,
Thank you.
yeah, Isam, please. I don't know if you have any other question, comment, or.
Yeah, thank you. We have the experience with WIP, and the most of the economic parameter can be implemented in WIP. But the advantage is that WIP can be controlled from outside, from any language, programming language. It means we can just run WIP as a processor and use outputs for microeconomic modeling if there is a need. My last question is, what is the framework you use or the platform to make this microeconomic modeling? It's GAMS or which software?
The micro is in GAMS. The micro with I is in GAMS. The macro with A is in Genpack, which is a completely different one. Okay. But yeah, it can be coupled using GAMS or R or Visual Basic.
Good.
I mean, it's a soft link. It's a soft link.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. So if you don't have any other questions, we are going to move on because we are running late already, very late, and we have two more presentations. The first one is going to be delivered by Ramiro. I mean, these are very short. I mean, these are very short presentations, just 5 minutes each. The second one will be by myself, and then we have another discussion if need be. So please, Ramiro, if you want, we can go on with the second presentation, which we are going to talk about. I mean, I think what we were talking right now is very useful because we're going to talk about refinements that can be done to the modeling we just presented.
Okay, sorry, I was mute. Thank you, Diony. And also thank you to all for the discussion. I learned a lot of things and all the features that will be used in TALANOA-WATER. Now, I just wanted to show you a couple of slides with the ideas that we were discussing a little bit with Diony and also in the research group at CMCC, how we could improve the coupling that we have within the micro and the regionalized CG model. First, maybe I told you that in the studies that we published in papers in the past, we have focused only on water policies. Maybe depending on the laboratory in TALANOA-WATER, we could use other kind of policies or even consider some kind of climate impacts as the input for the micro model. Then we could also improve the information exchange between the two models. And one point was already raised by Nina, and she said that output is also important when you have to exchange information between the micro and the macro model. So maybe we could consider to add, besides land use, also what is happening with gross value added, either as changes of productivity or other ways that we could find in the CG model. And then another thing that we were discussing with Diony in this kind of coupling was the idea of including not only crop prices, but what is happening with input prices, for example, fertilizers or other primary factors, which is additional information that could be useful in order to give more comprehensive insights of what is happening in the process. And the last thing maybe was to improve the software interface that we have now. So far, we have been using Visual Basics in Excel to couple the two models, but we were planning maybe we could migrate either to R or other software, depending on the alternatives that we have. And if you have also suggestions, there could be welcome. Then maybe just a suggestion, we could set up something like a data exchange worksheet for the models that we have in TALANOA-WATER For instance, here I made a simple table with a micro-scale model output. It would be either the hydrological or the microeconomic models. What kind of output could provide to the macroeconomic model, and also the same thing for the macroeconomic model. What kind of output could provide to the rest of the other models in TALANOA-WATER. And maybe we could circulate this kind of a template to all the groups in the laboratories, so we could start this exchange of information and receive what would be the wish list of each laboratory. And just a final considerations about the static or dynamic setup. So far, as Tioni mentioned before, all the work that has been done has been in a static setup. And that was what we were planning to do in the laboratories as the minimum. So the static setup usually considers a short-term horizon. Our analysis has been based mostly in 1 year or even less. And we consider in this case, mostly policy assessments. The advantage of this is that they are easier to implement because we're focusing only in 1 year. The other alternative would be to apply a dynamic setup, but only for selected cases within TALANOA-WATER, because this considers the medium to long-term horizon. And we could also add some kind of climate change impact assessment in this kind of framework. But for this, we should take into account which are the alternatives that we have to include dynamics in this kind of model linking or coupling. Either we have to do it in a recursive way or also seeking convergence in each year. So just to try to illustrate this point, when we think of a recursive linkage, we are not seeking to convergence in each year. So it's basically one directional link. So we start also with the micro scale. For example, in this case, I put in the micro scale to represent not only the microeconomic models, but also the ensemble of the microeconomic, hydrological, and maybe other models that could be coupled in this step. And then we will provide information to the CG model in the first time period. In the next time period, the microeconomic ensemble of models or the micro scale ensemble of models would use the information from the previous year from the CG model in order to start again one directional link. And that's what we are calling it for now, a recursive linking. The second alternative would be to look for a convergence in each year, as we did in the examples that I presented before, and before advancing to the next year. So this means that we will look for the convergence in the first year, so that both models will talk and reach a convergence, and only then the CG model would say or would transmit what happens with CG, with the prices, either from crop prices or also maybe input prices, to the rest of the ensemble in the microscale models. And a final addition that we could do in this case is just to add an external forcing that could be climate in this particular example, if we want to evaluate the impacts of climate change. Or maybe instead of climate, we could also take into account a different kind of policies that evolve in time. So these were the two alternatives what we were discussing also with Diony that could be implemented in TALANOA-WATER. And we would like also to have your suggestions and your feedback on this. And yes, I will stop here so Diony can continue with the rest of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Ramiro. This was this one was very, very clear. I mean, I couldn't find any other way to put it better. So Nina already made a comment. She said that the input prices are very important. Ready, we can have them via the macro model. I imagine substitutions between water and input to play a role in our scenarios. Well, I think, Ramiro, they should. I mean, in case we are considering also input prices, what do you think? I mean, obviously there will be some. If we consider water charges to be, for example, changing over our simulations, and then input prices are playing some role.
Yeah, I was thinking also about fertilizers, particularly with what happens now and what will be probably in foresight scenarios, the fertilizer prices will increase importantly. So
yes, we could try to see what happens either in a baseline that we should create for this particular assessment, what happens with fertilizers, and if we think that fertilizers will see an increase in prices, yes, we could try to model that. Or even if we want to include a specific policy for fertilizers, yes, I think that could be done also in the macroeconomic model. Yes.
Also, energy prices, perhaps, for areas like Tunisia, where they are using groundwater, and maybe depending on the depth of the aquifer, that may be significant.
Yes, yes. Also, maybe one advantage of using the CG model is that we could use different taxes in different sectors in order to show what would be the specific reality of each laboratory.
Yeah, no, and that, what you have been, what Ramiro just presented, and the comment from Nina is landing a key issue that we wanted to discuss with you in the last Q&A, which is the issue of scenarios. How we're going to develop the scenarios, because as you can see, if we go for this dynamic, in the sense that we are considering time, this dynamic setting, this is critical because, I mean, depending on the way we frame these scenarios, results are going to change a lot. And obviously, we want to keep them consistent with the IPCC scenarios, perhaps with a limited number of scenarios, 2, maximum 3 IPCC scenarios. But at the same time, it's true that while we consider IPCC scenarios, we also may need to consider other sort of scenarios referring to taxes, taxation, or policies related to energy or other sectors that may be very relevant to our research. And that's something that I mean, we are going to finish with that, so anticipating something, but that's something that you will need to discuss in the first workshop with the local stakeholders in the labs, because the first workshop, as you know, there's no modeling, but it's where we are going to gather the first feedback from the stakeholders in order to develop our scenarios. And we can revise them, obviously. I mean, we will revise them later on, but the first simulation we're going to produce will need to rely on what you gather on that from that meeting. So it's very important that we have. It was important that we had this discussion before, so that you see what we may need to run the simulation. So I'm going to make a very brief presentation. Where is mine? I think it's this one. Oops. Are you seeing the full screen or the presentation mode? Always have this tab now.
Full screen.
Great. So yeah, we have been dealing thus far with the first challenge. As you know, TALANOA has 2 key challenges. The first one is system thinking. So this socio-hydrology approach, how we can connect different systems that are very relevant to water resource management. We have been talking about microeconomic system and macroeconomic system, which is basically the socioeconomic system, the way we are going to approach it from TALANOA. Some other socioeconomic systems can be also included. We have also talked, obviously, about hydrological system, climate system, agronomic system. So it's one challenge. The first challenge, the first key challenge we have been trying to deal with in these presentations is how we connect them. And we follow this modular approach, or sort of add-on approach, in which whatever you have in your case study area that is being used by stakeholders already, we take it, we recycle it, and we try to incorporate different modules so that we can build on top of that something that is more comprehensive. So that's basically the approach, and why we chose this modular approach, because it's flexible. The second challenge in TALANOA is uncertainty. And that's something that is not so apparent, perhaps, from reading the proposal in the first read, but then when you read it twice and you pay attention to what we are talking about and the way we are going to develop our modeling approach, it comes out in a very apparent way. So basically, we are supposed to sample uncertainty, to assess uncertainty in our modeling exercises. So basically, we can run this modular approach, this system thinking, putting at the level of each system one model. So we can use mud flow, and then we can use WIP, and then we can use ICES. We have 3 models. You run one simulation with one climate scenario, and you have one deterministic solution. But in TALANOA, we are supposed to go one step further. I mean, we don't need to be really thorough, I mean, as the IPCC is, but we need to sample uncertainty, and we need to be aware of this uncertainty. So maybe we need to run 2, 3 climate scenarios, but at the same time, we need to consider different models, perhaps at the level of each system. So not just one microeconomic model, maybe 2, 3, 4, not just one setup of the macroeconomic model, perhaps 2 or 3, in order to get in order to sample uncertainty and try to identify robust solutions. Because the objective in TALANOA-WATER, the main objective, is to identify robust transformation adaptation solutions. In order to be robust, you need to deal with uncertainty. So, well, I put this this reference to this wonderful book, Asimov's Foundation, because in this book, well, they develop this psychohistory science in which they can make deterministic predictions and they are never wrong for millennia at least. And we can do that, and we know that our models will have some errors, and we need to sample them. And this is the second challenge that we face in Talanoa: uncertainty. How we deal with uncertainty, and the way we propose in Talanoa to deal with uncertainty is by considering these ensemble experiments. So multiple models, multiple scenarios. And obviously, we cannot go very, I mean, we can just go so far in this regard. I mean, we can maybe include 2-3 scenarios, 2-3 models per system. That's enough. I mean, we are not going to include dozens of them, such as ECMIP or CMIP do in their ensemble experiments, because this is a smaller project, maybe. So we are supposed to deal at least with the gray swans in this way. Okay, so the future that we can, obviously with the white swans, we are doing that already, but also with the gray swans. So the futures that we can anticipate that are plausible, we can model, or at least try to model many of them, so to account for uncertainty. And this is important because, I mean, we know that, for example, in terms of climate scenarios, we can use forcings from many different scenarios and from many different models. We just go to ICMIP, or we just go to CMIP, and we find CMIP6. We find dozens of different scenarios and models that we can use. In this case, for example, this is an example we downloaded for this presentation. This is showing you the average discharge at the Douro River Basin, which is our Spanish case study, in one section of this river, and it's showing you what the ECMIP projections are for this particular stretch of the river until 2070. And as you can see, well, you have here 86 possible combinations of scenarios and models. So this uncertainty sampling is very thorough. We don't want to go that far, but we don't want either to go to fall short of expectations, because this is what socioeconomic modeling usually looks like. This is a demand function for water, what you usually find in the modeling that you can find in economic papers. And here, well, you see the water price, and here you have the quantity that is used by the farmer. This is for an area in Spain. And here you say, well, the higher the price, the lower the water demanded. And this is fine, but I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty here. So it's, I mean, we don't want to go that far, but we cannot fall short either. I mean, in this case, you have one simulation, one scenario, a deterministic projection. Here you have 86 combinations for modeling and scenarios. We have to find a point in between, in which we sample uncertainty somehow by considering, for example, 2-3 climate change scenarios, 2-3 different setups of the model. Can be, for example, in the ICES, changing some of the parameters that you're using, same for the macroeconomic model, but we have to do. And this is something that I just wanted, this is my last slide. I mean, I'm going to finish here. I wanted to show you this because we need to start to think, all of us collectively, but also individually at the level of each lab, what are the key parameters that are prone to be more sensitive? What sort of parameters we should try to include in our sensitivity analysis? And it depends on the model. So for WIP, you will have some parameters. For ModFlow, you will have others. For a SWAT, you will have others, and so on and so forth. So that's something we need to start thinking about. Okay, we'll do that in our next workshop of Work Package 3. But in any case, just bear this in mind. I mean, after this workshop, and with this I conclude, I plan to send you, especially to the French, Egyptian, and Tunisian lab, I plan to send you emails, one email each, and in which we try to have a meeting to discuss what sort of approaches we can follow in Talanoa to integrate your modeling with ModFlow in the case of the Tunisian lab, for example, with within the framework we have proposed for Talanoa, which is, I think it's just straightforward in the Tunisian case, and also in the others probably will be. So I will do that next week. So you should be receiving this, try to arrange a meeting, very brief meeting, and discuss it. So we are running out of time, but I just wanted to ask you if you have any other questions, because we are supposed to have a Q&A as well here. So if you have any pressing questions, just feel free to ask them, or raise your hand, or just speak up. It's fine.
if I may, Dion, is just
Sure.
point out another practical point of view inside the labs. Next step inside the lab, what would reasonably be the next step? I mean, trying to figure out, for example, the model framework, the hydrology model framework with our scientific coordinator, for example, for the CMCC, and then start inside the all the metadata we have collected, which are the most urgent data to collect. What do you suggest as a practical next step for interacting with the user? Or shall we, for example, just wait the first meeting with Nina in order to start? Just a practical question, because under a technical point of view, it's quite clear what you explained.
No, thank you so much, Paulo. That's an excellent question. One we should try to address earlier in the workshop. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I would suggest that regarding the modeling approach, we start working from now. So my idea is to contact. I mean, I'm not going to contact. I didn't mention the Italian lab because I mean, with Artur, Ramiro, I mean, we are working. But obviously, we can have a meeting as well. So the idea is that from next week we contact with the different labs. And we start to identify the models that they are using and what's the modeling approach we are going to follow in order to start setting that up. And then we can start working on that because that's something we will use in the end. But then ideally in the first workshop, we discuss that with the stakeholders as well. So we say, okay, look, this is what we are planning to set up. Do you agree? I mean, this is obviously maybe not going to the technical level, at least not here, but saying we are going to consider this system. So we are going to model the agronomy, the climate, and the hydrological system, and the socioeconomic system. And they can say, no, it's fine, or well, really in this basin, agronomic is not necessary because it's not going to happen. But it may be that they suggest to some other system, whatever. So that's the first step. So I would suggest to start working on at least on the conceptual approach, to go to the workshop at least with some proposal to the stakeholders, and they say, no, this is not the modeling approach we are interested. Or maybe in the poll they say, no, look, we have our own model, we can use this model. And then obviously we need to convince them to collaborate with us, because otherwise. And then the second important point is the scenarios. We need to, and then I'm going back to this. We need to agree with the stakeholders also what the scenarios they are interested in modeling. So it may be because in some river basins, the river basin plan already has considered one RCP 4.5, whatever. So at least we should consider that one, but maybe they say, well, look, if you can model this and that other scenarios, it's great. And then we should go for those scenarios as well. So yeah, I would say that before the first workshop, the key issues is to discuss the model setup and the scenarios. And then obviously the problem is the policies, what policies we are going to develop. But that's, I mean, I guess that's implicitly, we all have that in mind. So what policies we are going to discuss. So it's going to be pricing, charging, or just climate change impacts, and that we'll see. I think that those are the three most important tasks to discuss in the first workshop. Let me check, because so I'm just taking a look at the grant agreement. So it's, yeah, identify research gaps and challenges. So basically the policy, co-design the scenarios. Also, the scenarios should include what are the maximum amount of water that they are planning to use. So what are the constraints that they are going to impose on water to achieve their goals. The policy they design as well, and the baseline, and the modeling. So these are the things that we are expected to discuss in the first workshop. Everything is in the proposal in page 16. Is the table 2.2b.
I had a look at it. It's quite,
yeah. So
we make sort of a first guess between us, and then we go to them in order to discuss and get feedback on how to proceed.
Exactly. Okay. So this is what we are doing right now here in the Spanish case studies. We are building the models already with some examples. So we are running them, but just because we already have the models. So obviously maybe we need to change it. And then we are coming up with an assessment of the scenarios, and we're going to present everything to them with some results and let them decide. If this fine, this is a scenario, this other, this model, this other, and then we start working from them. No, excellent question, by the way, Paolo. We should have mentioned that way before.
Oh, thanks. Now it's much clearer in my mind as well. Thanks a lot.
So I don't know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, I will suggest that we finish here because we already used our hour and a half. We are 5 minutes late. So thank you all for your time. I hope it was useful. I think it was, especially the first Q&A was really great. So we'll have this bilateral discussion with the different water labs, the work package 3 team with the different individual water labs, in order to agree on what modeling approach we may start to set up. Also bearing in mind that this will have to be revised with the stakeholders, but at least to come up to the meeting with some proposal. So yeah, by next week I will send you an email. In the meanwhile, take good care. If you have any questions, suggestions that come to your mind later on, we can have a meeting or just drop an email, and we'll keep in touch in any case for the next workshop. I don't know, before we leave, Nina, I don't know if you have any update on the next work package 4 meeting, or you're going to send us an email.
Well, maybe we can return the question to Issam. If he agrees to host the next monthly meeting in 4 days on Tuesday the 5th. As I said, I'm not exceptionally, I'm not available, but I think maybe it's good to maintain it, just to do a roundtable, and maybe we can address these questions of operational steps in the labs. So I don't know, Issam, I'm not sure whether you answered us, to Diony and myself.
Yeah, I think he replied. I think Issam said that he preferred to have to be all of us together to continue the discussion. So okay. Perhaps I don't know. I mean, if it's really up to you.
Yeah, so otherwise, maybe we should also ask all partners, if you have no pressing issue on the labs, then I would suggest we skip this one, as I'm not available, and we have our next meeting, which is planned on May 3rd. And there, ideally, we have 2 times in the meeting, one with general question and a roundtable to go in each lab, and the second session on maybe the Italian colleagues presenting as the TALANOA dialogue methods. If you are okay, and if you don't have any pressing issues that you want to address us, well, address not us, but to all partners, then we can wait until May 3rd.
Do we do that? Do you agree, Sam?
Yes, I think we need to be, I think we need to be together and to discuss all the details. It's better than just meeting for round table, because there is no urgent things. And I think we progress now in the modeling aspects, and with some exchange with our local partner. In May, we'll get a lot of things to discuss, I think.
Okay, and maybe we can add that recall, as I said, the board, the Klaxoon board, is still open, and what we would like to do is to have it as a permanent tool. So if you have questions that raise up, be them detailed oriented or very important question, don't hesitate to plug them in. I added 2 boxes with general question and second one, I don't know what. But please keep this link, register it in your favorites. And so it can be also a way that we keep communicating and exchanging ideas on the work package 4 without having meetings. So yeah, maybe we could test this up until May the 3rd, and then May the 3rd we see all the questions that they are there, and I will have a look regularly. So if you have some issues or some points in the agenda you want to add, please input them in the Klaxoon board. I think it's a good option.
Excellent. Thank you. And also, well, we won't have this workshop, but we have several bilateral workshops with the different laboratories to see how to set up the modeling. So that will be also a nice input to the Klaxon, that after this meeting, everyone goes to the Klaxon app and tries to make at least 2 or 3 sentences with the challenges or advances. Great. Thank you, Nina. So
I have an extra question, sorry, not directly linked, concerning the deadline for the first workshop, stakeholder workshop. Do you think it's still feasible in September? I think officially it's month 14, so it would be July. July is not really.
It's the problem. Yeah, we started a few months late as compared to what we were supposed to start. I think they will be understanding. I mean, we cannot organize a workshop with the stakeholders in July, nor in August. So yeah, it has to be September.
Yeah, initially we've planned it in June, but
for June.
Yeah. But June. It's a bit difficult because we hire someone that will arrive later, so it's.
No, I assume they will be understanding. We can make an amendment of the grant agreement in any case, but I think that it's perfectly justifiable that we are going to make it the first month in which we can work, because they will be on holiday. So no way we can organize it in Spain at least.
As in Italy, it will be practically impossible to have someone attending the workshop, or half of the people will be on holiday. So. I strongly agree.
No, it's the same here, and I assume everywhere. So yeah, let's go for September. I will ask in any case the project officer, but that's something that there's no other way to do it. So yeah, that was it. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you. Well, some of you, I'll see you over the next weeks. Otherwise, we'll see each other again in May, for 3rd of May, for the work package 4 workshop organized by Nina and Isam. Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye bye.